Good morning. How's everybody doing?
Good.
Wow, that was an intense session, last session. Lots of changes, lots of things that we can do. So I know you all are excited to go back and play with some of those reports. But we are so thrilled this morning to have with us Dr. Chad Waldron. I've had the pleasure of attending a couple of national conferences with Dr. Waldron. I call him my friend now. I think that's okay. He does a fantastic job of breaking down complex research methods and notions for all of us who are not research people, and I'm not a research person, and he just has so much energy and passion for this program. So let's welcome Dr. Chad Waldron this morning.
Good morning. 3 cups of coffee in, so I apologize if at any point in time I need to mentally slow myself down and talk a little bit slower. Being from Pennsylvania originally, we can talk a little bit fast at moments. I've gotten much better as a faculty member working at University of Michigan, and with the coaching of teaching undergraduate teachers, I get the glazed over looks from 20-somethings that look at me and go, huh? Like, what are we talking about? So, it's a pleasure to be here. I am so glad to talk with you about the research that we conducted in Erie County, Pennsylvania, on the Imagination Library, looking particularly at early literacy achievement and storybook reading. So first, I just want to say thanks to some friends of mine. If my remote clicker will work, and probably auto shut itself off. Technology. Come on, there we go, perfect. So first, the Imagination Library for inviting me. I'm so glad to be here to talk with all of you. To my friends at the United Way of Erie County who were so generous in supporting my travel to be here, and also to the University of Michigan School of Education and Human Services. They are my day-to-day employer, and they are so supportive, particularly my dean, in the work of the Imagination Library. And also Penn State, the Barron College in Erie, Pennsylvania, their core outreach research center, who actually were my partners in conducting the research. I led the research in Erie County, Pennsylvania when I was a faculty member at Penn State, and they helped to support and provide statistical support, all the fun, boring stuff we do in research sometimes. So today, I had to always begin with this quote, and I always go back to this as a literacy researcher and a previous literacy teacher. I taught in the classroom. My background is really childhood and elementary education. I worked as a reading specialist, so I actually worked with some of the most at-risk kids from kindergarten to 3rd grade with my early childhood background. And I always go back to this quote from Dolly, that you can never get enough books into the hands of enough children. It's so, so important, the work that we do, that all of you do in getting books into kids' hands. It sounds so simple. When I talk to parents, oftentimes I'm still asked by families about, what should we be doing with our child at home? This is the things we do, this is the things we don't do. What do you think? Those sort of questions. And it's always fascinating to them when I just say, you just need to read and talk about books with your child. And they kind of look at me very befuddled and say, so that's really all I need to be doing? Well, of course there's more, but that's where we start. That's the most important thing. So in thinking about that, all of you know the Imagination Library very well. We know that it's growing. We know that it has an important impact in a variety of communities, in a variety of settings. For example, I live in Flint, Michigan now. That is where I work at the University of Michigan Flint. We have just brought in, we are 7 months into the Imagination Library, so we are the new kids on the block. And in Flint, as many of you have heard from national media, we just exited and are exiting a water crisis where there was lead poisoning in the community. We have a generation of children that were exposed to toxic levels of lead. This is something that the United States, communities in the United States are starting to deal with. Flint unexpectedly was placed in this scenario. Flint historically has had issues with the auto industry coming and leaving and coming back again. The community has been through many things, but is in a renaissance, in a revival now. And the water crisis has kind of turned the page on how we think about our community, how we think about kids in our community, and what we can do to help them be successful. The Imagination Library has become a part of that. And yesterday we talked about the research and marketing session. They mentioned the high quality children's literature. As someone that's a literacy researcher, one of the first things I did in looking at the Imagination Library was looking at the books. For me, it begins and ends with the books that kids are getting in their hands. And a lot of them are award-winning children's literature. For example, Last Stop on Market Street has been awarded multiple times for diversity, for the award-winning text in the story. There are many books within the library that have come and gone over the years and that are still in the library that are award-winning, high-quality children's literature. These are not, as I often say to my students, the Barbie books that you see at Walmart Supercenter when you're checking out. You know, Barbie goes to the vet. Those are fun books, not to hate on Barbie, and I'm not hating on her. Kids will go to those, right? They want to read about Barbie going to the vet, or, you know, Bob the Builder building the town post office. But those stories are not high quality. They're what we call very basic level stories. It exposes children to language and text, but they're not the stories that will build rich vocabulary and comprehension across time. So I wanted to stop and think for a minute before I get into the research and things that we found in the Erie, Pennsylvania community. 2 questions for you to think about. And you can talk to your neighbor, so your elbow buddy, as we say with the elementary kids. Don't talk too loud or get into a fight with your elbow buddy is the other thing we often say to them. What inspires you from the Imagination Library, and how has someone reading to you changed your life? How has it impacted you? So turn and talk to a neighbor just for a few minutes and talk about how has Imagination Library changed your life? How is reading? Someone that read to you, think back, go back into the archives. But I know it's scary, right? Go back into the archives. Who were those people that read to you? How did they change your life doing that? So go ahead, talk to your neighbor. Four, three, two, one. See, it's just like elementary kids. Adults are the worst, I will tell you. Okay, I'm the same way. 4, 3, 2, there we go. It's like kindergarten kids, you know, I send you guys loose and this is what happens. We'll start with the first question. What inspires you in the Imagination Library? Who wants to share? Start us off.
Not only are we impacting an individual life, but if we can take a behavior that has not been modeled to a parent, model it, provide the materials, model the behavior, so that that parent learns how much fun and how important early reading is, that child grows up in that home knowing. And so it's passed on generation to generation.
Oh, someone way in the back. See, here we go. You have to understand, I teach in university classrooms like this, so I have to move. I can't stand. Go ahead.
What inspires me is hopefully that the kids learn the love of the smell of a book, the feel of a book, the touch of a book, because that's my memories of opening that old musty library book and sniffing it up.
And sometimes have that weird smell, right? That we go, oh well, I'm reading it.
And it's going to allow you just to escape.
Absolutely. Well, and nothing like the smell of a brand new book, too. Even as adults, we love that. Okay, second question. How has someone reading to you changed your life? How has it impacted your life or your community? Think about your role. Who wants to share? I know the tough one, the metaphorical one. Yes.
Well, my mother used to oftentimes read verse to me and my sister, and I'm convinced that reading, especially rhymes and metered verse, has very much the same effect on the brain as music does. It helps to organize it, and if we ignore that, the child simply doesn't come later. At a certain point after puberty, it can happen.
Right. Great point. And so we know the brain is hardwired for literacy. That is one thing in literacy research from the medical field. We know the brain is hardwired to take on language, but it needs that support and scaffolding. There has to be those exposures and opportunities, repetition, right? Think about things that you've learned. You know, we learn to do behaviors from that repetition and exposure, and storybook reading is one of those. Learning a story, the pattern of a story. What else? Another example. Thank you.
Mine wasn't from the early years, but I remember being read chapter books even as an older child, and just the, you know, being able to turn your mind off. So now that I have some children that are in their like 8 and 10, after school, a really busy day at school, and we sit and we read a chapter book like a Roald Dahl or Anne of Green Gables or something, and just encourage them to just kind of relax, even as older.
Yeah, and it's interesting, linking on to what you were saying. I was a child who actually had to have reading intervention services, so being a male, being a spring birthday, you know, in education there are some, you know, traditions of boys who are spring birthdays are sometimes developmentally lagging. Little background about me, I was raised in a single parent home, but my mother was a first grade teacher for 35 years, okay? She knew literacy inside and out. She was in one of the key developmental years. As you read literacy research, first grade has the largest gains in literacy progress, where we take children often just from 1, 2, or 3 word picture books into multi-sentence picture books. Reading development grows the most during the first grade year. That's why there is reading recovery and a whole tradition of reading interventions that center on first grade. And for me, I hated reading. I was a child that she will tell you even to this day, I could not get you to sit down and read with me. You were not someone that wanted to do that. And it took until 3rd grade, my 3rd grade reading teacher, who literally would let me read anything I wanted. You know, it was not prescriptive, it was not, you know, it was read what interests you. And I remember often going back to the Berenstein Bear books. And I remember my mother thinking I was insane at the time, but she gladly let me read them because I was reading. So it was like, leave him alone. He's reading, we're gonna let him do this. And so it's interesting, now being someone who has a PhD in this field, there's been a lot of growth, as you can imagine, and it's interesting. The choices that were made by that 3rd grade reading teacher, and by my mother in the home environment, really supported a conduit to helping me progress and move forward. And then becoming, you know, someone in high school who was in AP literature classes. Had you talked to me as a 3rd grader, I was not the child you would have thought was in AP literature classes in high school. So children can change, people can change because of literacy. So it's important to think about that as we think about programs like the Imagination Library and the work that they do, which is so important. So this picture is a little bit faded, so I'll tell you what's in it. My brother is to the far left, my mom is in the middle, and I'm to the right, and this is Dixie Stampede. I was age 11 or 12 at the time, and it's interesting how things come full circle in your life. You know, those moments where you realize it's like that just moment of self-realization sort of thing. We were standing in line waiting for Dixie Stampede, first family vacation to the Smoky Mountains, and I remember seeing this big train, and the Dixie Stampede still has this big wooden train loaded with picture books all over it, and a big placard explaining the Imagination Library program. And I remember looking at my mom as a teacher saying, what is this about? You know, and we're reading the placard together, and my brother's there, and, you know, she's reading to us about how kids get free books, you know, at being part of the Imagination Library, how it started right in this county. And I remember just thinking how cool that was as a teenager, that these kids are getting free books, kids that need books. You know, we talked about how we have books in the home, but some kids don't. You know, went into this whole conversation that we just kind of had there, standing after getting our picture taken, which I remember hating as a teenager, and just kind of standing there talking to one another, and we moved on. We went into the dinner theater, and, you know, it's kind of one of those things that just go into the back of your head. And then I was invited by Penn State to participate in research about the Imagination Library, and immediately my brain, that light bulb went off. Wait a minute. I remember something about this, and I found this picture. So it's interesting how my journey to the Imagination Library has kind of come full circle. And just getting that experience and thinking how cool this program was, and now getting to see it in my home community. So we're going to talk about Erie, Pennsylvania's journey with the Imagination Library. This is their logo that they use on their promotional materials. And you're going to learn about how I was brought in as a literacy researcher. I was invited. They were in their second year learning about the Imagination Library. They were new to this. But they were getting a common question, as many of you who are local partners, is this working? How many of you have been asked that? Is this working? Okay? Charged question, right? Depending on who's asking it. At the time, it was their most influential donor, saying basically, we're happy to help you set this up and keep this going, but we need to see proof. We need to see that this is working. So Lori Root, who is the Senior Vice President at United Way of Erie County, she could not be here. She is at a fundraising conference right now. Don't want to be her. I told her, Lori, I'll have fun in the Smoky Mountains. You have fun fundraising. And she wrote back, LOL, you're funny. And so she, had the insight to say, we need to bring someone on board that can help us with this. And so that's where I was invited in, along with my friends at CORE at Penn State. My remote is not liking me today. So Northwestern Pennsylvania did a study in 2006-2007, and they found that we have a poverty imperative. A little bit about Erie County, Pennsylvania. We are nestled between Cleveland, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh, so between three meccas. It's right on Lake Erie. A little bit about the community. Largest grower of Welch's grapes, meaning we have didn't know that, right? 96% of the grapes are grown in Ohio, New York, and Pennsylvania for Welch's grape jam. And they're great products in general. And so we have a large migrant worker population. There is an urban center, which is Erie. Going out to the community, you have suburban communities as well. They have a tradition with International Paper that was a part of the community. And then going out, we have rural farm communities. It is diverse, very diverse, as you can imagine. And so we kind of run the gamut as a county. Well, what they found was there was a poverty imperative, that many of the children who were growing up in Erie County, Pennsylvania in 2006, 2007, did not have access to social welfare services because they were scarce, particularly in rural migrant communities that were outside the inner city. They found out a majority of the children were growing up below the poverty line, which was a red flag. They also found that the children were not accessing state-funded programs that could actually allow them 3- and 4-year-old preschool in the state of Pennsylvania. So with this poverty imperative, they realized that we were seeing red flags that the Erie community had never seen before as a county. So United Way of Erie County, working over the next few years, secured the replication funds to start Imagination Library, and this became as a part of a multi-pronged approach. Basically looking at if we can grab a child at birth and begin to support the families in their role with children, we want to get families who are college and career ready, that it's across the continuum. So they have adult programming, they have teenage programming, all the way down to elementary school and early childhood. Now in its 4th year, United Way of Erie County has reached 16,826 children in the county, and there are currently over 10,000 active children that are enrolled, that are receiving the Imagination Library books. In fall 2015, they reached out to Penn State and me and said, we really want to study this. We need to understand what's going on. We know it's the first 2 years. We know some kids have only gotten the book for maybe a year, the books. Some kids are up to 2 years. And we want to understand these kids that are going into kindergarten this fall, what changes are we seeing, if any? So they knew going into this, there may be changes, there may not be. As a literacy researcher, with such a short intervention time, meaning some of these kids were not getting the books for very long, I was even kind of skeptical. What might we see? What might we not see? So we started in on our journey with the research. So key studies to think about. I know yesterday in the research session they mentioned some things briefly. I want to give you kind of the key research in literacy that I drew from, that we think about. Storybook reading has been shown to have a powerful effect on young children's literacy knowledge and subsequent measures of early literacy skills and strategies. Susan Newman did a classic study in 1996 where basically she looked at families who engaged in storybook reading with their children, found there was a significant difference for those kids on early literacy measures. Also, Portor and Edwards talked about that there are family and emotional social benefits that come along with storybook reading, that if we did not have those interactions, children would not have the social emotional connections to literacy that they do when they enter school, that storybook reading provides that conduit for them. At the other end of the continuum, we also have to look at, so not just this joy of storybook reading, but kind of where the rubber meets the road. What are children acquisitioning as skills and strategies that are going to set them on a path to success? Well, the National Early Literacy Panel in 2009 did a meta-analysis of basically all early literacy research to date. And these were Lonigan and Shanahan, two very large literacy researchers in the field who have done early literacy work for years and years and years. And with their colleagues, they called through what they called gold standard research in the literacy field and found that concepts about print, which is the idea of how we look at print knowledge and visual processing. So, this is if I were to hand one of you a book upside down, what would you immediately do as an adult reader who is a fluent reader? What would you do? You're all making the motions. Turn it around, right? To make sure that you can see the text correctly, that you can see the illustration correctly. We found in early literacy research, when you have children as young as 3 and 4 with early storybook knowledge, if you hand them a book upside down, if they've been in a house where they are being read to, they'll automatically rotate the book. Even if their verbal skills are not as developed, they will rotate. There's an automatic rotation that they do. They realize that it has to be oriented a certain way. Children who have not had books, leave the book upside down. Oftentimes will not rotate it, will not know where to open it. They'll go to the back instead of the front, those sort of things. The idea of text moving left to right. In the English language, we read left to right, top to bottom, left to right page. That is a skill that young children learn. That's embedded in concepts about print. And it also starts to tell them how to visually process text. And connected to that is letter knowledge, including alphabetic recognition. If a child knows their uppercase and lowercase letters, including font variation, we know in children's literature that fonts are not all the same, right? We can pick up a book and it can be that squiggly font that we look at and go, ooh, who picked this font, right? Even as adults. But we can read it. That's a skill that children develop. A's, think of the letter A, all the variations of how A looks in printed text. Young children have to be able to discriminate those differences. So when we think about those 2 key variables, these were 2 out of 11 that became a target for early literacy achievement, meaning kindergarten readiness, 1st and 2nd grade. These were the kids that needed less intervention, that progressed to grade level, that were on the path to literacy success. These were also the kids, when they looked at these 2 out of 11 variables that I teased out as important for imagination library, these are also the ones that indicate 3rd grade reading achievement. Now, is there a direct correlation? Not always, because as they talked about yesterday, there are other factors that come online. Is the child still being read to in the home? What is the instruction in the classroom as a child enters formal schooling? All of those things, but there is predictive power. They realize these things are important. So this informed my work in thinking about the Imagination Library, and of course, thinking back to Dolly about building a love of storybook reading, which we see all over the Imagination Library website, and we hear in all the things we read and see with the Imagination Library, I decided as my theoretical how I would think about this is the child at the center. Yuri Grafenbrenner, another dead Russian psychologist, as I always say to my students. Education has a bunch of dead Russian psychologists. I have no idea why. Welcome to the traditions of my profession. And what's interesting is a lot of this was not translated until the 80s and 90s because of the SSR and all of the relationships we've had. But it looks at the ecological and social interactions in which literacy occurs, that we know for a child to become literate, it is not just one factor. It is not just getting books in the home. It's the parent talking to them. It's going to church experiences. It's going out in the community and talking about going to McDonald's and looking at the menu and seeing the pictures of hamburgers and a child looking at it and saying, I want that hamburger. That is all literate behaviors. And those interactions between these systems that a child goes through have powerful implications on how a child can become literate. So if we think about the Imagination Library as an intervention, something that's coming into the home from the community, that's pushing upon these circles that work in tandem to provide a support system for children. In addition to that, we know parental involvement actually provides expert scaffolding. In literacy tradition, we talk about shared reading. The idea of sitting next to a child, the lap reading, that is a shared reading experience. That interaction with a book has such powerful implications on whether a child can do that themselves, because they're seeing expert modeling. All of you have been around young children who oftentimes you'll read a story to them, and this is the creepiest thing we all experience as adults. They pick up that book 2 days later, and they're reading the story, right? And do they know the words? No. They're looking at the pictures. You've read to them. They're reading to you. My niece used to do this all the time. It would creep me out every single time she did this. And she'd have the animation that I had. She'd have the stops I made. And I would just look at her like, really? Okay. And I could hear myself, which was the worst part of it. And I used to read her, Strega Nona and all of these books that she loved, and I could hear, when I would talk like the grandma with her, and I had a terrible Italian accent, but she thought that was hilarious, and she'd replicate that. And I would go, but that was her early literacy skills coming online. She could replicate that. So this is powerful in how we think about Imagination Library. So here were the 3 research questions. What were the early literacy skills and strategies? We designed this as what they call a quasi-experimental or a comparison study. We wanted to see what were the early literacy skills and strategies of children who participated or did not participate in Imagination Library. What were the perceptions of parents and caregivers about the early literacy skills and strategies possessed by children in DPIL? So we wanted to talk to the Imagination Library families because we knew things were going on in the home, but we weren't sure to what degree. And survey research, as we know, can provide us at least pictures into what is happening. And we also wanted to see what their perceptions were of the contribution of the books in their home literacy practices. So thinking it back to Brofenbrenner with his circles, we want to capture what's going on at the child level with their skills and strategies. We wanted to capture what was going on in the home environment. We wanted to better understand that interaction between the 2 levels. So the researchy stuff, which I can see, I'm getting to the good stuff. People are making notes and taking pictures. This is always my fun part of the presentation. This is very little, but I'm going to walk you through it. First part. We had 394 kindergartners at 6 elementary school sites. This included urban, inner city, suburban, and rural populations. I will tell you that out of the total population, some interesting statistics, 42% of the children approximately were English language learners who were tested in this population of the total 394. So they were kids participating in the Imagination Library. Out of total diversity, many of the children who were non-Caucasian or white was about 62% of the population that we tested. So in looking at this, in Northwest Pennsylvania, we had 188 boys and 203 girls. The median age was 5.8 years, meaning that most of the children were almost 6 because of Pennsylvania law. Most of them, though, there were a few 5-year-olds. The range was from 5 up until 7, and I talked about the different school sites. I elected to do, as a literacy researcher, Clay's observation survey. A little bit about this. When I was first approached, I was asked about how many of you know dibbles? And I heard some laughter. Okay. As a literacy researcher, dibbles, or dynamic indicators of basic early literacy skills, came about at the time of No Child Left Behind. Little historical of dibbles. Dibbles was actually linked to a lot of the policies that were linked to literacy achievement with classrooms throughout the United States. Dibbles in recent years by literacy researchers, particularly in the last 2 years, has been problematized, meaning it is not a perfect instrument. Also too, as an assessment tool, we have what are called diagnostic measures and we have screening measures. Dibbles falls into screening measures. It is not a diagnostic tool. Anyone who tells you it is not. You can actually go back to their original white papers from the group that authored Dibbles, and they will call it a screening tool. It's not diagnostic. Unfortunately, what happened in many K-12 settings and even pre-K environments, which it's not supposed to be used in pre-K, but that's a whole nother conversation for a whole nother talk, we're using it in ways that it was not designed. So, it actually was linked to intervention, that if a child was red flagged, quote unquote, which I hate the word red flag, were red flagged on Dibbles, they were routed into interventions, often immediately, without looking at other data sources. Best practice in literacy assessment tells us we need to use multiple sources. So when I was approached to do this, many of the schools have Dibbles in place, but it is a state requirement as a screening tool, that's what the state of Pennsylvania says, to use for possible intervention, possible being key word. And so I said to them, I said, as a metric, I'm a little concerned to use this. It's not as well vetted. You can't get the reliability always with it, particularly with children who are ELL learners. I said, I don't feel comfortable using this. So I actually recommended Clay's survey. This has been around since the 1970s. Maury Clay, New Zealand, has a long tradition of literacy intervention work. It is well vetted. Ohio State actually has a validity and reliability center that you can actually upload your data and match it to your community and region to ensure you're getting accurate results. It was much more appropriate for using in the school settings we were using. As well, in the letter identification task and concepts about print, they are untimed. Dibbles are 1-minute measures. You start the clock, you ask the child to rattle off the letters, and you stop the clock after 1 minute. All of you have been around a 5-year-old. How do you think a 5-year-old on average reacts to a stranger coming up to them and saying, today we're going to read letters. I want you to begin at the top and read left to right. You will begin and I will time. Put your finger on the first letter. Ready? Begin. Click. Ay. Correct. Children, even as literacy interventionists, I knew these children would look at me like, aha, you're funny, and they'd sit there. A. C. Hey, kids move at their own pace. We know that. You have the child that'll move fast, you have the child that'll move slow, you have the child that moves in between. For me, I wanted to actually see, do they know these letters? Because the brain, cognitively, we know, can process these things, but in a high stressful situation of sitting in an assessment, it's still an assessment, there's the anxiety that can come in. So, we opted to do Clay's letter ID. Also as well, it allowed for font variations, a little bit better than the Dibbles. As well, concepts about print allowed us to get to the heart of storybook reading. How are they actually holding books? Can they point out the cover? Can they rotate a book? Can they point to an illustration? Can they point to where the sentence begins? Do they know where the sentence stops? All the questions and probes that you use in the concepts about print book, and they're specially designed. They have upside down illustrations where you flip to the page and the child looks at it and you say, what's wrong on this page? Children who've not been exposed to books oftentimes will go, nothing. And on to the next page they go. Child that has been read to will look at you and say, no, the picture, there's something, and they'll rotate it, or they'll tell you it's upside down. They can articulate that. This is 5-year-olds. So if they can talk to you about the book, there's obviously been exposure in the home. So out of the 394 kids that we read with over a 2-week period, it took about 7 minutes per child. We found 114, which was approximately 29% of the population that were Imagination Library kids. So a robust sample size in educational research to actually have a sufficient number of kids that were receiving the Imagination Library books. Come on, clicker. I have to be within there we go. So we collected it using random number assignment. We wanted to protect the children. These are minor children, and I take that very seriously as an educational researcher. They were coded out so that we did not know who the kids were and where they were. They were entered into Excel and SPSS to do statistical analyses. Maury Clay's book, just as a side note, is a $32 book. You can buy it and you can replicate it as long as you order the book. And I verified this with Ohio State. You can replicate it for as many children as you want, as long as you have the book. So as an assessment instrument, it was cost effective. $32 plus the cost of copying. I'll do it, particularly when my university at the time said, copy away. We know that's like gold, let's just copy. And then we did the parent caregiver survey. We did this electronically. We had iPads that we were able to get, which was great. And we actually would hand them to parents when we had interactions, or we would send it electronically if they had the technology in the home. We had parent evenings that we went to. We would look at them and say, does your child participate? They would enter their name. We had a third person that would match it to the library through United Way because they had access to the list. And then we only got the results that were coded out as well. The survey was designed, we actually did a pilot the summer before, that's a great question. And so we actually, what we did was, the United Way had a survey that they had borrowed from another Imagination Library chapter. We recrafted it because I added variables that I've seen in other parent caregiver surveys regarding home literacy practices. And so then we designed it that way. Yep. So it was delivered in English. We did have some classroom teachers who were bilingual who would actually translate at the parent events. Yep. I promise we'll get to questions because I know there's good ones. So just hold them. It's good to see smiling faces, which is always good. And I can tell you're processing, which is good. So here's the nitty-gritty stuff that you're going to love. Okay. United Way president looked at me at the end of all this and he said, Chad, just get to the brass tacks. What's the bottom line? You know, what did we see? Kids who received Imagination Library books performed significantly better, statistically significant, per terms of educational research, than children who did not receive the Imagination Library books. I controlled for preschool exposure. I controlled for gender. I controlled for variables that are recognized in literacy research as having other impacts, quote unquote, on literacy achievement. Even when controlling for those variables, it was still statistically significant. So, participants performed significantly better on Clay's letter identification test when compared to those who did not participate. And we notice visually, there's a difference. Upper and lowercase letters. What's interesting, as a literacy researcher on a side note, it was very interesting to tell the kids who just had been exposed to various different letters. They could do it, they did it confidently, they did it anecdotally. Participants performed significantly better on composite variables. So, when we got to the concepts about print test, it is designed for a child from 5 years of age all the way up until 8 years of age, which puts us in 2nd grade. There are questions on the concepts about print tasks that are designed specifically for 1st graders, that are designed specifically for 2nd graders. Clay provides guidance in the original text that talks about things that are appropriate for kindergartners that you should look at and analyze, and ones that are not. As you can imagine, overall, there was no difference between kids in Imagination Library versus non-Imagination Library kids. But it was looking at the test in entirety. So I narrowed in on the composite variables that I created, which were the questions that were most appropriate for kindergarten kids. For example, one of them was text and illustration orientation. Letters going backwards, letters going correctly, sentences being upside down. Illustrations being oriented correctly, illustrations being oriented upside down. When I narrowed in on those specific variables, there was a difference. In the kids who had the Imagination Library books, there was the statistically significant finding. They performed better than kids who were not in the Imagination Library. Also as well, I wanted to look at broader early literacy strategies that I knew were in concepts about print, supported by the National Early Literacy Panel, which was word and letter concepts within text. The Early Literacy Panel also talked about, in looking at concepts about print, one of their nested variables that they found that was influential was the idea that when we hand a child a text, we can say to them, show me an uppercase letter, show me a lowercase letter. Point to where it begins, point to where it ends. In questions 21 through 24, those particular questions on the CAP assessment actually looked at those variables. And once again, children who had the Imagination Library books versus kids who did not, when looking at those isolated series of questions most appropriate for kindergarten kids who've had early literacy exposure, it was statistically significant. So as you can imagine, I was happy. We were seeing differences. But of course, I wanted to hear what was going on in the home, because that may fill in a piece. We've controlled preschool. We know the kids who had preschool, kids who didn't. Interestingly enough, only 41% of the kids in our sample of the 394 had a preschool experience. Interesting. And we found out 65% would have qualified for a free preschool experience. So just a little tidbit on the side as we were doing the analysis. And so that, of course, as an early literacy person, just made me want to scream, but that's okay. We're working on that. So we focused on those early literacy skills and strategies. We focused on the home literacy practices. We got a 28% response rate. Usually in educational research, we like to see at least 25%. So I made it over the threshold, which was good. Over 88% of the participants surveyed said they had 20 plus books for their kindergarten child. Now mind you, these were Imagination Library participants. Folks, basic math. They only had a year or two in the program. How many books would they have at minimum if they only had a year? 12. How many would they have if they were in there the full 2 years? 24. So, we were led to believe the majority of those books most likely came from the Imagination Library. And many of the parents self-reported, just anecdotally in the open-ended comments, if it weren't for the Imagination Library, one parent comment sticks out to me vividly, if it weren't for the Imagination Library, I would not have books in my home. Point blank. Approximately 44% of the participants, this one really got me, have never visited a public library. Okay? A little bit about Erie County. They had 12 public libraries, 10 public libraries originally in the beginning of 2000. There were state budgetary cuts where they were no longer allocating funding. They closed. There are now 4 in the community. Okay? 10 to 4. Bookmobile program, that got sliced as well. So going to rural communities, distant points that don't have libraries of their own, that cannot afford to have a library of their own, that there's no library access. Kids in inner city, it's a 10 to 15 minute bus ride with their parent to get to a library. Most parents, to take that 10 to 15 minute bus ride, which would cost them close to $5 one way, in a lot of homes, they're not going to take that route. The other 48% said they only visited the public library 1 to 2 times per month. What was interesting is I contacted the public library and I said, how, does this match what you're seeing? And they said, oh yeah, absolutely. We've seen significant, declines in our circulation. We're not seeing young children as much anymore. Our story times have been cut because we're not getting kids in like we need to. As you can imagine, this all has a ripple effect. So it was interesting to think about, in light of Imagination Library, majority of these homes, if those books weren't coming in the mail, would books actually be available to the kids? Most likely not, or limited. So moving on, some other interesting things we found. We also found that when provided with the books, they self-reported that 85% of the time, they were reading 3 to 4 times a week. Okay? National surveys in literacy, research over the years, have found that the magic minimum number for 15 minutes per day is usually 3 to 4 times. Now, do we ever want to tell parents only read to your child 3 times a week? No. And I will tell you, in my life as a teacher, I had many parents say, well, we have soccer, we have this, we have that. I don't know if we can fit reading in. Find the time. I was like the broken record. Find the time. While you're in the car, sitting, waiting for something. Read. Doesn't have to always be a book. Are you getting magazines in the home that the kids like to look at? Oh yeah, we subscribe to this. Highlights magazine. Pick it up and look at it together. Do something, anything. And so part of it is we were seeing that they were self-reporting reading, and some 37% were saying 7+ times a week. So those were the children that I'm sure were asking for the repeated readings of books that If any of you are parents in the room, you've been through that favorite book that can never be put down. That was that multiple times of reading exposure. And 93% of the participants surveyed found reading to their child as, quote, very important on our Likert scale items. So we do see that parents and caregivers and families in our community, I do like to use the word families because a lot of grandparents, aunts, and uncles are now raising children in the Erie County community. So I like to be a little bit more inclusive than parents because they don't self-identify as the parents. They talk about we are family members raising the children. They viewed it as very important. So something for us to think about. And then at the end, so what we were seeing was this initial positive impact. We realized that there was a lot of good things going on, and this is just started. So immediately, United Way of Erie County's question back to me was, what will this look like when we see our first cohort of kindergartners who have had this since birth? As a literacy researcher, we would assume that we can replicate those findings, that we would see the same positive impacts and outcomes. And also, too, what we might see particularly is the implication of reading behaviors in the home. For me, the parent and caregiver survey will become even more powerful for how long and the duration and frequency and books that are present in the home. One thing that I think is important from this research is the idea of strong letter knowledge and concepts about print. It's been well established in literacy research that these are important. What this links to is makes one of those initial links back to storybook reading. There have been studies that have talked about storybook reading and have said, oh, well, we know it helps letter ID, but not made the direct, link to that exposure. This starts to make that link to children who are read within the home setting, which for me as a literacy researcher is a powerful validation of why we say reading at home is important to your child, not just beyond the rich language, the conversation, the emotional affect that comes with that, but also the literacy skills and strategies. So Erie County realized that they needed to do scaffolds for the parents. The one lady right here was asking about the ELL parents. They've actually started bilingual programming within the schools with the highest need. They have community school programs now, where they're actually going into early learning centers where a majority of these kids are, as well as the elementary school settings, and they're helping the older siblings to take home reading behaviors with their younger brothers and sisters. As well, they're going into the early learning centers and working with the families to embed language practices around English as their second language, which we know is so important. We want to map on and have the child learn their native language. That is critical. Research has shown we want to develop and strengthen the native language, but we also want to begin to map onto the English language, which is used in our K-12 school systems. In addition, they've started a Reading Buddies program where they're actually training volunteers to go in and work with families in these early literacy settings to actually embed literacy practices within the home. We know that not everybody is a teacher. Not everybody knows what to do with their child. One of the best questions I got recently, 2 weeks ago, I was working with the Coalition of Black Trade Unionists through the UAW. I had a mom raise her hand. And she said, Dr. Waldron, I have to ask a really dumb question. I said, no question is dumb, only my stupid answer I give you. She laughed and she said, so my child, every time I read, he's going like this over the book. You ever seen that motion where kids are constantly trying to look at the pictures? And I said, what do you mean he's leaning over the book? She said, yeah, because I hold the book like this, okay? She's reading, he's 3, okay? Get this visual, I can see this scenario as clear as day. And he's leaning in over the book as she's reading. And then I show him the pictures at the end. Why is he constantly leaning in? And so I said to her, okay, 2 things going on here. I said, 1, he's hearing the language. He's hearing you read, and his brain is processing that. He's thinking about that. But I said, young children, schema and background knowledge is not there. They haven't had those life experiences of, for example, I think of Matt De La Pena's book, the rain pattered on the windshield. That line. There's a picture on that page that illustrates the rain hitting the windshield. Pattered. Child is going to look at him and go, what? Young child. I said, he needs to see the pictures. I said, you can rotate and sit with your child. Oh, well, he doesn't like to always sit on my lap. I said, okay. What about sitting side by side? Sometimes. I said, okay. What about holding it? And so I visualized as a teacher how we often do it, that we hold the book out here. I'm right-handed, so if you're a left-handed person, it's the opposite side. Holding the book out here, reading the words, showing the pictures at the same time. I said, I used to do that with my niece all the time. She didn't like to sit, she'd be playing and say, read the story to me. But of course she was watching, she was listening, but she was multitasking. She was the child on the floor with Barbie, listening to me read about Barbie becoming the vet. And so, Barbie and I were not friends. And so it was Barbie becomes a vet, Barbie becomes this, Barbie becomes that. I'm like, well, Barbie just can't decide what she wants to do in life. But in her pink Jeep all the time, right, folks? Must be nice. So it was always interesting because I would hold the book, but that was my teacher training coming out. This parent didn't know to do, and she went, oh, I never thought of that. I said, just hold it up. Something so simple that all of you as people who work with families regularly are going, duh. For them, she felt stupid asking that question. And I said, that is not a stupid question. I said, do you know how many parents ask me that? Lots. Just do it this way. I gave like 3 different scenarios. Other parents in the room who didn't answer the question, I could see light bulbs going off. And these are parents that want to go out and work with other families to help support them. Workers in the UAW, people in the Flint community. So thinking about that, it's important that we model those very basic things we take for granted as proficient readers. So some future research. I want to do a study again. I've been invited back to reconduct the study. It's now 2 years that we'll be doing that. And also as well, I want to look at both participants and non-participants in the Imagination Library because I want to understand better, particularly in the non-participants, why they aren't in the program. Something was missed along the way. That gets to community variables. We know in all of our communities we missed enrollment, there are hard to reach populations, all of those things. I want to better understand what's going on there, particularly since there is such diversity in this community. Is it a language barrier? Is it an economic barrier? Is it they just, for some reason, may not see the value in getting free books for their child? Which sounds crazy to us, but to them they may have very sound reasoning. I want to better understand that. So in thinking about it, that is something moving forward. Another part, which all of you further inspired and made me think about yesterday, is I've taught children's literature before. I want to start to think about the books. The books, particularly as we think about the new standards that are coming out in early childhood nationwide. There is this shift, to standardize early childhood, to think about standards that guide our practices. One thing we know is that we want children having a range of texts in their life. They need to be exposed to rich, diverse texts. I think that's something that the Imagination Library does very well, but it's not captured anywhere. It's not documented. So it's something that as I think about other studies, that's something that I could see as a potential for future work. So just a little bit, we can do the stop and think in just a moment because I'm looking at the time. I did want to highlight a little bit about Flint. That is the bay in Erie, right by the convention center, and that is the famous Flint River that you've heard so much about, that runs right by my campus in that lower picture. It is a gorgeous river, just not so gorgeous when it's untreated water, as we know. So, and it's interesting, it's a really powerful part of the community and has been for years. GM uses it as part of their production. It's integral to the community, so it's a very interesting place to be and a time to be, and I'm very glad to be a part of it. This is United Way of Erie County's continuum of self-sufficiency, starting with emergency and basic needs, being born and staying healthy. They are working hand in hand with our local hospital systems, all out of Pittsburgh, but are very committed to helping the Erie community to become better. And they are actually becoming the advocates for getting parents and kids in the Imagination Library program. We have so many nurses that are doing the day-to-day work of looking at a parent with a newborn and saying, I need you to fill out this form, because your child's going to get free books. And I had a nurse tell me at one of the meetings I was at, she said, Dr. Waldron, I kind of got into a fight with a parent one day. I said, what do you mean got into a fight? Probably not the best way to help a newborn, mother who is just already stressed and now you're stressing her out more. She said, well, she didn't understand that it was free. She thought she had to pay. And I said, oh. And she said, I just kept saying, it's free. It's free. You're never going to have to pay. And I said, did you just walk away and come back? She's like, yes, I finally did. But I was so frustrated because I wanted her to get the books. And I said, I get it, but just give her a moment. Give the form. She'll probably fill it out later. No. And so, these nurses are being advocates in their health role. And we have pediatricians that are now checking in, asking, is your child enrolled in Imagination Library? Are you getting the free books in the home? They've committed to doing that as well, which is awesome. Entering kindergarten ready, going all the way up to securing and maintaining employment. They've launched the Reading Buddies program. They are ensuring access to early childhood education. They actually are joining the campaign for third grade level reading. As a community, the other part of this is that they are going out to the community and signing kids up in eligibility zones where they have identified children through social work that actually are getting social services a family that are not enrolling in preschool services. They're going out and scaffolding that conversation because oftentimes these families are so overwhelmed with the social services they're receiving, they sometimes shut out when it's that same person telling them the same thing. So United Way is actually coming in as just a different person to say, did you realize your child can get free preschool? And oftentimes they are grabbing those kids and getting them into the free preschool programs that are available. Monthly family newsletters and their multi-tiered community partners. They have corporate and nonprofit folks that are showing up and volunteering and being active parts of the community, which in Erie historically, everybody kind of did their own thing and worked in their own little, areas of expertise and didn't talk to one another. That has completely changed because of this is a community-wide initiative, which is just amazing and wonderful to see. Come on, clicker. In Flint, Michigan, we're doing really the same thing. We are starting at birth with book-rich environments and quality early learning and parent education, going all the way up until age 21. We want kids to be ready for workforce engagement as well as training, ways to contribute in the community to be purposeful members of Genesee County, which is Flint's county. And also as well, they have the Flint Kids Read campaign, which is where we're nesting all of our work. The Imagination Library is the centerpiece. All of these things build out from that. So we have a home visiting literacy coach. Our families that are most at risk in Flint are receiving free of charge, thanks to the Intermediate School District, a home visiting literacy coach that is going to come in and coach on all things literacy. This person is going to come in and talk to them about reading to your child, things that you can do in the home, ways in which you can engage with your children. There are community events that are coming online this summer around the book themes at the Imagination Library's Book Ship. They're going to have those community events that are linked to that. So they're really trying to make it part of the culture in Flint. We also have our early childhood centers. They've received a free complete copy of the Imagination Library books. Why? It is a common text now. The child has it in the home as a 3-year-old. They come to their daycare center, they have that book read aloud to them. So the Flint Public Library, who is our local champion, they are at the American Library Association this week presenting about their work with Imagination Library. They actually are paying for those books to go into the early learning centers so that those books are there for the kids to use and they have common books. They're also building in family literacy supports. The idea that we know it doesn't stop with just these 3 things. And this is the idea of community events where families can come and learn about it, training for partners in the community, as well as thinking about ways that we can talk to families around literacy in ways they understand. We have a high adult illiterate population in the city of Flint. So part of it is making these materials accessible. Getting parents to understand that literacy is not just reading to your child. That's a core component of it, but you can picture read. You can open a book and sit with your child and you can do a picture reading. That's literacy work. Talking to your child about their day, that's literacy work. Looking at the books together and talking about experiences you've had together, that's literacy work. You don't have to read yourself. We can help you to be successful with your child. For a lot of them, they've had very bad school experiences, so they're very hesitant to work with anyone from the school system. I have to say the school system has been really good about stepping back and allowing other community partners to deliver that message. They're there to support, but they're not there to be the kind of big brother that often these families do not want to interact with, but getting them supported so that they understand that this is a positive thing. So ultimately, in both of these communities, the one thing I like to think about are these stair steps. That we know it's not just, as they talked about yesterday in thinking about the logic model for Imagination Library, it's not just one steps, but multiple steps. We have to think across a continuum. This is not just a one intervention, it's going to fix everything, but rather a series of multiple things going on. I think about it as kind of the balancing plate act, that we have all these plates spinning, right? And sometimes we drop them, and that's okay. I tell myself that all the time. But we're spinning those plates and we're allowing for multiple opportunities of access. That is the thing. It's getting us to a stance of how can we build equity and opportunity to support families, community, and college and career readiness. Getting folks to be a part of their community, feeling like they're supported, and helping their young children through all of these important transitions. And we think about third grade as kind of this touchstone in literacy research of if children have mastered a lot of the initial literacy skills and strategies that by third grade, when they are first tested in many states for national measurements of literacy progress, this is demonstrating that they've made that progress. So it's thinking about how, not just in third grade, but beyond, how can we best support families in the work that they do? We know every family has different needs, so thus we have to be flexible in the ways we think about it. And really, measuring impact, we know can be done, but we have to think about the changes we can make in our communities. So that brings me to the end. I want your good questions, because I saw hands and people kept going like this, ready to ask. So I'm sure there are good things you want to ask. So thank you, and then we'll take questions. Thank you. Start us off.
My question is about the 28% that returned the survey. Okay, how did they compare to your entire cohort of parents and children to begin with? Were they?
Oh, like who were the people?
Yes,
who returned the survey?
because I wanted to know if the people who were the English, already understood English, already were high income, had sent their kids to preschool, are they the ones that are sending back the survey and saying things?
Okay, so her question, everyone heard it, right? About who was the population of that 28%? Who were those folks? Okay, first, a majority of the respondents were from our lowest income school settings because of family literacy nights. But remember, we had an iPad, we were standing there with the Imagination Library Table logo. We'd ask, is your child participating? Yes. Would you mind filling out a survey? Sure, and they were kindergarten dedicated nights. So it was these parents that had their kindergartners, the same kids we had interacted with assessments. So it was kind of in a sense, they were a readily available moment that we could. So a majority of them, I would say, if my brain is working, at least 52% were from those low-income school settings. There were some parents that were English language learning parents. They usually had, I can think of two instances. We had an older sibling actually translate the survey, like stood with the mom, and the mom was standing next to, sorry, I'm using you as the example. He would translate and mom would respond, and they would respond to the survey. Other parents opted not to do it. They said, no, thank you. There were our ELL parents. They were diverse. We did not capture that as a survey question, but just anecdotally, I was there for 4 out of the 5 survey touch points where we were interacting. They were diverse. They were majority non-white, non-Caucasian. Does that help to answer? And a lot of them, half of them did not have preschool. Within, I would say maybe a little less than half, because we had such a large number that had not participated in preschool, and a lot of them were from those lowest income elementary school settings. Oh, absolutely. Yes. Absolutely. Yes. Yes. So I will say two of the sites were with participation were the low income families. Another 2 were from our suburban environments, and then I think the 5th was rural, if I recall. So that kind of gives you, we tried to balance it as best we could, but as all of you know with survey research, you get who responds. And oftentimes, in my article that is out under review right now, I actually teased apart the profile of what the contexts were for that survey response, but that's a great question. So I do say that the highest response rate was, just anecdotally in the survey system, was from our low-income schools, so that does skew the survey part, absolutely. The early literacy skills and strategies, though, was balanced across school sites. Yeah, great question. Oh, thank you. Ooh.
What were some of the main asks you had for the school district? Mainly in terms of, you've made comments about demographics, which is not data that we have, but data that would be matched against the names that you're providing. And what were some of the barriers you came as you were negotiating those data sharing agreements, and any advice as we are beginning in the early stages of working with our 2 local school districts?
That's great. Okay. First, if you have a university who's willing to help, have the university act as the third party. So in a sense, I became kind of the outside conduit between United Way and the school district. So in other words, I was kind of removed in a sense, which protects data, of course. Second, because we have the systems in place as a university to do that. Second of all, it also makes school districts feel comfortable knowing that they have trained researchers that are going in, conducting the surveys. We offered that support. So if that is available to you, do that. Now, if that is not available to you, and I actually was just emailing with a community recently where we discussed this, one of the things you can do is make very clear to them things you'd like them to do in advance. So for example, the demographic information, school districts have that, and it is readily available, particularly in public schools. That is public data. Now, where it gets a little dicey under FERPA, the Freedom of Information, what is it? Family, Education, and I can't remember the rest. Thank you. It basically protects children in public education settings, as it should. That information sharing has to be done in a randomized way. In other words, you can say, here's the list of children that participated in our study. Please provide me demographic information using random number assignment, however they have to do it. So basically it comes back as a cohort. So when I talk about the data in general, I use the word cohort. It's a cohort of children that are comprised of these things, because we would never want to target a particular, like you asked the question about the survey. I know that, but would I ever want to identify which school that, no, for a variety of reasons. And so part of it is, you have to offer those reassurances to school districts, because they're in the business of first and foremost protecting the children that are in their doors. And I will tell you, the largest urban school district looked right at me and said, I realize you're a literacy researcher, I realize you were a classroom teacher, but here's where we're concerned. And they had a list of 3 very common questions that I get from educational school sites about, how are you going to protect the data? What are you expecting from us? What, and how much workload is this going to be, is a common question, because they're overworked. They just are. And so I tried to make it as seamless as possible, that I would give them the information. United Way sometimes, just because they control the database, we wanted to protect the integrity of the database. United Way had a support person that was a data analysis that basically provided the list that would do this match back to all the kids, but it removed it. The person was trained in data management. They were trained through Penn State. They were cleared to access the data. So we followed very particular protocols to ensure everything was managed to the utmost safety and security of our participants, since it's minor children. Does that help? Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep. And I can tell you how we've negotiated those things. I can tell you Penn State's, even their institutional, we go through what's called institutional review board. It's a panel of individuals that review it at the university who are well trained in this. The minute I said I was going out to 394 kindergartners, red flag, red flag, red flag, red flag. You are with 5-year-olds, you are with this, I'm getting all these messages back in the system. Please clarify for us what you're doing. Who's going out? Are they cleared? All these things. And I said, These are all the protections I put in place. You know, they're only going to know the child on a first name basis. They never got so the individuals that were with me, they only knew the child by their first name. The test materials were coded in such a way that they would look at it and say, Susie, and that was it. You know, there was no last name. There would be no links. I also asked the individuals that I trained to go out and give the assessments with me if they had familial relationships, friend relationships in that elementary school. They were rerouted to another school site. I did not want them interacting with kids in the school site that were, because that's an integrity of data sort of issue. Yes?
Okay, my question has to do with the planning process for the research.
Yes.
So when you first began your planning process, what was the time frame which it took for you to put your plan together? How long did it take? I think you said 2 weeks to actually conduct the research. How long did it take to get your results? And how much does it cost?
Those are all the questions everybody loves. Okay, I did it on the cheap first. Anyone who knows me knows that I am a researcher who will nickel and dime and find money wherever I can, but I do it on the cheap. So, how much did it cost? Total for my time, the team I had, the pre-design phase, the post-analysis phase, United Way paid a total of approximately, I'm giving an approximate number out of respect for them because they are not here to give definitive numbers. It was approximately no more than $5,000, okay? So, couple things to fold into that. Universities do have research grant dollars, typically, to support working on community initiatives. If you approach them as a nonprofit organization, they love being able to send their faculty members out into the community to do this work. For example, at University of Michigan Flint right now, I have support dollars available to do the work in Flint that will not cost the Literacy Network any money, because my university has those dollars. Penn State, on the other hand, when I did it originally, had very little. It just depends. It's the university. So, time, going back to time. All of us want data immediately, right? It's like that yesterday sort of thing. Folks, let me be the first to tell you, the last to tell you, the middleman to tell you, data does not come overnight. It just doesn't. To do this well, it started in March. I worked for I had to start the university process, which takes 4 weeks, to just get initial approval, to even begin planning and interacting with school districts. I had to get their endorsement. Once they approved my research design, I worked June, July with school sites. I proposed the idea. I went out for face-to-face meetings with superintendents at the, it was 3 different school district systems, 4 different school district systems we ended up working in across the 6 elementary schools. Basically worked on it. Then we went in October because I did not want them to have extensive kindergarten instruction. I wanted to avoid that factor. Anyone who is taught in elementary school will tell you the first month is a little crazy in kindergarten. It's basically trying to get the kids just to stand in a straight line because the majority of them are like, what? School? Where are we? Welcome to 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds. Plus they have initial assessments they have to do for the state. So oftentimes they're in assessment mode for September. So October was the prime time. When I proposed that to school districts, they were very positive about that. They were worried September was going to be overwhelming, and I got it. I said, no, I won't do that to you, and we're going to come in, we're going to do the assessments, we will be the people. So basically we floated in for a day, sometimes 2, depending on the number of kids at a site. We came in, we had a team. I trained undergraduate students to test with me. They went through the protocol of Clay's observation to go through the training because I have been trained, so I can train them. They practiced under my supervision. We actually did a pilot because I wanted them to get comfortable with the instrument. And then we proceeded forward and did the assessment. So yes, in 2 weeks in October. And then the data analysis. That took November, December to dump everything into SPSS. and pull the survey results, because we were still doing the surveys into early November and doing the analyses. I did the write-up across January and February on my winter break. In January, came back, I wrote it because the people I were working with were statisticians. They did not want to write. It was not their forte. And they weren't literacy people, so they said, we'll pull numbers for you and you get to write about it. And so they wrote it. I reran it just to verify it. I wrote and I presented it in late March to United Way. And then I had to do a board presentation with United Way in April. And then I've been attending educational research conferences. So essentially it took me an academic year, 9 months, with the summer work that I put in beforehand. So really, to do this well, folks, number one, I would wait until the kids are at least in the program a year if you have a new program. Don't do it right away, because you are not going to get the participation you need. Second of all, you really, really, really need to start planning at least 6 to 8 months out and thinking about forward what you would want your target date to be. Fall is really ideal when kindergartners are coming in the door. Flint actually wants to look at preschoolers, so our 3 and 4-year-olds, as we onboard it in future years to come. And so we're actually going to start that with our 3 and 4-year-olds. I think year 3 is what we're targeting, that'll give sufficient time to get kids enrolled that they'd at least have the books 2 to 3 years, and we'll look at them as 4-year-olds. Did that answer? Because I see other hands too. Yep. Yes, absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Yes, I will be honest, and I know this is the #1 question I get. I am happy to send you the executive summary. They're going to put, of course, my PowerPoint presentation up. You will have my data that you can pull from that gives you the assessment instrument names. You can buy the assessment on Amazon, literally. You can buy the Pro book. Use Follow Me Moon. That is a full color book. It is the probe book is called Follow Me Moon. It's in full color. It's been reauthored to look like contemporary children's books. All of the other ones are circa 1970, are in yellows, browns, and black and white. Most children look at those and go, that is an ugly book. Literally, I've had a 5-year-old look at me and say, that is an ugly book. Yes, it is. Follow Me Moon is in full color. It has been revetted as the new book that's most appropriate, particularly for youngest literacy learners, and so it's a good one to use. Great question. Yes? Chrissy's the time monitor. She's going to yell at us.
So that was loud, sorry. So we are just getting ready to launch here in a few months.
Yep.
And I definitely want to be able to collect data because it's a multi-county program. What should I be doing now to establish a baseline that will help us monitor our data capturing later? We do have a university in our area. We also have, I'm in Kansas, and we also have a new kindergarten baseline that they're implementing just this year.
Okay.
So I'm thinking I'll be able to get that data from by district.
I will tell you, just from experience in Michigan, we're trying to implement a kindergarten readiness measure, and as you can imagine, it's kind of like a train going through a station and it's barreling through. It's not going well so far, so we need a little more time for our kindergarten readiness measure. They've been asking about that in Flint, but we're not ready. We are starting early literacy programming statewide on a much more orchestrated level. We've had it for many years, but it's getting more definitive on how we're thinking about it in Michigan. Kindergarten readiness tools, one cautionary tale I will tell you is oftentimes when they are designed, it's with particular standards or focuses in mind. Sometimes neutral instruments that have been established, like clays, like some of the others that are commercially available, sometimes can bring in just an outside lens that are not as scripted sometimes as state level instruments are. Not all state level instruments are bad. Some have a lot of great components to them. I've seen wonderful ones that are used nationwide, and so it just depends on the instrument, who designed it, and if there's reliability and validity data backing up the use of that instrument. I would say, for now, your baseline is going to be your kids that are starting in on the Imagination Library. I would wait. I would wait. That truly, you could look at assessment data for your community of where kids are at right now without the Imagination Library. If you can establish the data sharing. School districts are oftentimes a little leery of just handing out pages and pages of assessment data because they're under such high scrutiny. So you got to make friends with them and see if they're willing to share it. A lot of times it is available on school report cards. Sometimes it's not. It just depends. Yes. It's lunchtime. Thank you all.